Hey everyone, sorry I'm getting this out a bit late this week, but I enjoyed reading your discussion, your comments about Jennifer Seaman's Borderlands Curanderos. Um, this is the first time I've assigned that book with this class, and I enjoyed reading it again with you all. Couple of comments I want to make here in a second, but before we get to that, um, do keep in mind that next week the assignment, the focus is on the proposal for the final project. If you have any questions about that along the way, let me know. If you want to bounce ideas off of me before you submit your proposal, because what you'll have to submit is an explanation of your topic, a research question, and remember to have an open-ended research question, kind of like what we do for the discussion assignments, and also kind of preliminary bibliography. It doesn't have to be complete yet, but just kind of this is what I've been able to find so far and what makes me think that this is going to be a viable topic for the project. You're also going to decide on what type of project you want to complete, whether a digital timeline or kind of like a story map. I've given options and examples in the assignment instructions. And of course, you always have the option of doing an essay. So you'll let me know all of those things. And again, along the way, if you want to ask questions or get some feedback on what you're thinking, let me know, and I'm happy to help with that. To that end, I have put a link to an extra credit option below this video. It has to do with evaluating research questions. So this is just an exercise that will help you think a bit more about what would make a strong research question for your project. And so if you would like to complete that, you'll receive extra credit. I'll build that into the gradebook here as we go, but you will receive extra credit for that. If you do it, and I think it's a good activity. I'm also going to put a link to a resource about primary and secondary sources, just as a refresher, because we had some discussion about that on the discussion board, thinking about which sources are most credible, reliable, and the answer is it really just depends. And that's what I was trying to get at in my comment on the discussion board. In some cases, a primary source like somebody's journal, somebody's diary, a letter, even a newspaper account can be highly credible. It's the thing that's closest to the event. And I mean, in a nutshell, that's what historians are talking about when they call something a primary source, something that was created at the time of the event that gives us a window into that event. Now, all of those are going to have a certain perspective or a certain bias, if you want to think of it that way, because the person who's writing the letter, depending on what historical topic we're talking about, whether we're doing a biography of that person or we're looking at that letter because they were talking about things going on at Los Alamos, for example, during the Manhattan Project, if it's someone who was involved in that. We might be asking different questions of the sources as historians based on what project we're doing and how we've defined the scope of the work we're doing. So that's also going to make a difference in terms of which sources will be the best for a given project. And so, again, it's always something to think critically about, because historical evidence is imperfect. It just is by nature, in part because it's always incomplete. We don't always get everyone's perspective as we wish we could, because not everyone leaves behind written or other types of records that will survive over the years. But we want to take as many of those as we can, read them with secondary sources. So those are, like Borderlands Curanderos and other works that we've read this semester. Those are works by historians that have taken a lot of primary and secondary sources and created a narrative and an examination of a particular moment in time. So we want to see how is the author using those things, and are they being critical of their sources? Because any author who's taking their sources at face value, whether they're primary or secondary, that should be a red flag to us. And so those are some questions to think about when evaluating sources. It's never going to be as clear-cut as this one's always more credible or authoritative than that one, but what is the context that we're looking at them in, and how does that matter? One other thing that I was kind of interested in with Jennifer Seaman's work was the issue of the supernatural. So she's looking at curanderismo, which does contain elements of the supernatural and of religiosity, because it's a syncretic or a blended practice that combines indigenous knowledge with Catholic belief in the context of that turn of the 20th century border region. And so I think she does a good job of trying to understand Santa Teresa and Don Pedrito on their own terms. How would they have understood themselves and their role in their local societies? But in some ways, she sort of sidesteps the question of the supernatural. And I'm looking for a note here in my Kindle edition of the book, so that's why I'm looking away from the camera. But I mean, the way that people consider the supernatural is an important piece of curanderismo. And so, for example, on page 103, there's a passage where she says, call them casos, jests, scripts, stories, folklore, or mythology. In the end, these stories, like the story of how Don Pedrito acquired his don, function as guides to frame and make sense of the sometimes painful and sometimes joyful existence, while leaving a record for following generations to do the same while valuing their culture. So she puts culture front and center in these things. And I just wondered if you all had any thoughts on the way that she engages with or doesn't the supernatural aspects of curanderismo. So I would offer that as a second extra credit opportunity, and I'll write that as well below the video. If you want to respond to that as a discussion question that I just posed, you can just respond directly here in the announcement, and I will also create and develop that extra credit category in the gradebook. All right, I'm looking forward to your blog posts. Again, thinking about how her work may or may not be a microhistory that demonstrates something broader about the borderlands at the turn of the 20th century. As always, if you have questions, let me know, and I'll talk to you soon.